All right, well, let's get this party started. I'm Chief Meteorologist Jeff Lawson here in the 13 News Weather Lab. Evan Stewart, socially distanced about 8 feet away or so over there at our monitor wall. So we're going to be discussing tropical storm, now Hurricane Isaias. It's a hard one to say. We get a lot of comments on it. So let's start off. You can see behind me here, we have some rain moving in, but it's not really associated directly with the hurricane. In fact, as we widen it out, you're going to notice that most of the hurricane, in fact, all of the hurricane, is down to the south. Here it is. The first of the bands is up into south central North Carolina, up as far as, I don't know, Fayetteville maybe, way south of Raleigh. That is the storm right in there. All this other rain from our area through central Virginia, back down through central North Carolina, and all the way down into western South Carolina, that is the front, the stalled front, stationary front that halted over the area and now is using those winds on the south side of it to suck the storm up the coastline. And that's why we have some rain, but again, not directly associated with the actual storm. Here it is, Category 1. Let's put on the current coordinates for you. Moving north-northeast at 16 miles per hour. Winds of 75, gusting to 85, and again, just to the east of Charleston. Actually, it's a little closer right now. I just plotted it to Georgetown, South Carolina, a little bit south and west of Myrtle Beach. So that's what we'll be watching for. And by 2 a.m., 70-mile-per-hour winds north, maybe almost due north, let's say, of Wilmington in North Carolina, and then over Wilmington, Delaware, 12 hours later. Was figuring it out. Craig and I were on the phone. Works out to about 28 miles per hour on average. It'll average over that 12-hour period and come right up through western Hampton Roads, but all of our area and all of eastern North Carolina feeling some of the effects. So, Evan, tell us a little bit more.
That's right. A little more specific. 60 miles right now south of Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, about 60 miles east of Charleston, South Carolina. And I did want to go back and look at the satellite loop, Jeff. And you worked with the Hurricane Center. What are you seeing on this satellite loop, especially here on the eastern side of the satellite loop there?
Well, a lot of dry air. I mean, you can see, I don't want to get too close to you, but you can see all that dry air starting to work its way in. So
wrapping around.
That's that dry slot. Remember earlier, all down across Florida, all the big storminess was offshore, and the west side was devoid of any precipitation. People kept saying, well, if it comes up to our west, that'll mean we're right where all the heaviest rain will be. Well, no, it doesn't, because the storm's transitioning as it gets forced between that cold front. That pushes the heaviest rain then between the front and the storm, and it starts to line up on the west side. So that dry air will help to keep it, hopefully, from strengthening much more before it makes landfall. Maybe a few miles per hour, I guess, could conceivably get an extra 5, but shouldn't be much more than that as it works its way on inland.
Right, we've got a pretty big dip in the jet stream that's coming in, that's helping to push the storm out, and it's that dip in the jet stream that we think is going to actually keep the storm from weakening too fast and bring some of the gusty winds up along the eastern half of Hampton Roads. So let's talk about that a little bit, Jeff.
Yeah, well, inland areas are going to get the heaviest rain. We're going to show you some plots of that in a minute. We've been saying that for a few days. Rainfall amounts 3 to 7 inches. Only 1 to 3 inches here, sort of in the metro or the 7 cities, if you will, for the most part. You get west of, Southampton or Franklin, west of Williamsburg, amounts will be more like the 3 to 7 inch, with some of the heaviest amounts sort of right down the middle, probably pretty close to I-95, actually. But the big news, the winds. Winds of 40 to 55 sustained, so anything over 40 is a tropical storm, but there's a big difference in the damage from a 40-mile-per-hour tropical storm with, say, gusts to 50 and a 60-mile or a 55-mile-per-hour storm with gusts to 70. One maybe knocks down some tree limbs, probably doesn't even knock down that many trees. You get up over 70 or near 70 for the gusts, you're not going to only have trees down. You're going to have even some siding off of some homes. You're going to have some shingles off your homes, maybe some canopies on gas stations, that kind of thing. And that's outside of any isolated tornadoes. So we are going to have some minor structural damage, I think, with this system as it comes through. happened a couple times in the past when we've had storms like Bertha and Bonnie come through, and everybody ends up saying, you know, or a lot of people say this is worse than what we had with a couple of the hurricanes. When we're on the left side of the hurricane and they pass 50 miles offshore, we end up not getting a lot. But this kind of a path will give us higher winds, but be better for most of the area in terms of the storm surge.
Yeah, I'm going to talk about timing while you log on and check the Facebook, because I'm sure we've got some people that are coming in with some questions and comments. Again, looking at the winds, here's 8 o'clock. We just passed the 8 o'clock hour. Still no issues out there, and that'll be the case even as we go through about midnight. It's after midnight that we really start to see things ramping up, and some of these times might be a little hard to see on the screen, but that's Tuesday 4 a.m., 8 a.m., and midday Tuesday noon. So it's really in that 4 a.m. to noon time frame that we're looking at the issues with the winds, with the rain, with the tides, and that tornado threat. And anytime you have a landfalling tropical system, there's a lot of spin, a lot of energy left over in the atmosphere. And once it's spinning out over water, there's not a lot of friction to really slow the thing down. But once it makes that landfall and it interacts with trees and the ground and buildings, all that twisting motion, all that friction starts to spin up little tornadoes, and usually they're not too strong. They're usually an EF0 or an EF1, enough that it would do damage, but they can pop up really quickly, and they typically move pretty quickly. I believe it was with one of our last systems we saw some of those tornadoes that they were saying were moving at around 30 or 40 miles per hour. So we'll have to be watching that very, very closely. With those gusty winds, we are looking at scattered to numerous regions, seeing some power outages. Again, scattered from most of the area, but right near the Albemarle Sound, the Currituck Sound, up across the eastern shore, numerous power outages will be likely because of falling trees and power line issues.
Yeah, a couple of questions have come in so far. Got over 1,000 people watching us right now. First question is, wait a minute, this is a hurricane? Well, it was a tropical storm, then it was a hurricane, then it was back to a tropical storm, then it was a hurricane again, then a tropical storm. I think it's at least the second. I'm pretty sure this is the third time that it has been a hurricane. So again, it goes every 5 miles per hour. It drops 5 miles per hour, and it's the strongest tropical storm you can get. It goes back up 5 miles per hour, and it's back to being the weakest hurricane you can get. So it does keep varying. People want to know what they can expect in Williamsburg. Well, we showed you a general outline of what to expect across the region. But for example, these will be some of the winds. Show them Williamsburg and show them some of the other areas. Evan.
Right, and again, some of these numbers might be a little tough to see on the screen, but the general idea is here's Tuesday, 4 a.m., the storm located here south of Fayetteville, and the strongest winds still across eastern North Carolina. It'll be after 4 a.m. that we see some of those stronger winds move in. For example, MELFA, this computer model, the GFS, 8 a.m. is saying 59 mile per hour gust, maybe a gust to 72 in Matthews, 78 in Hampton. Those are the areas right near the Chesapeake Bay or right near the water. Not as strong once you move inland back towards Franklin, Williamsburg, right there at around 50 miles per hour. And then as the storm exits, those winds switch in the other direction. And by 2 o'clock in the afternoon, we see those winds really start to go down. And I'm going to jump ahead real quickly to the rainfall forecast as well. And we'll take camera 5 again so you can see some of those numbers. Again, here's Monday, 8:30. Here are some of those cities. Here are some of those rainfall totals. And again, this is just an idea. It's not an exact number and an exact total. But as we go through, let's go back to that. I got a little bit ahead of myself. Let's see, I don't think I can go, but there we go. Got a lot of stuff loaded into the computer today. Yep. All right, here we go, back to going through Tuesday. Heaviest of the rain back through central parts of Virginia, so maybe some higher amounts, over 3 inches up around West Point. Here's that Williamsburg, 2.5. Once you get closer to the coastline, we're looking at lighter amounts. We said about 1 inch, so somewhere around there.
And the winds in Williamsburg would be generally, as we said, 40 to 55 roughly, with some gusts higher than that, maybe up as high as 70, probably more like 60 something. But let's go back over it. Well, actually, I'm going to get to a couple of things. So where was it? Oh, will Virginia Beach lose power? Evan just showed scattered and even numerous loss of power across the area. There it is again. So, and in other words, most of the area is going to see at least neighborhoods that are without power, and many neighborhoods potentially in some of the areas that are more red. So we're expecting a lot of power outages, a lot of trees down, and we've been saying that for days and days. So that's the first question. The next one is any storm we can compare this to. Michael from 2018. No, Michael was, well, yes, I can, but not to Michael. Michael, nothing to do like this. That one brought tons and tons of heavy rain, not as much wind as we're going to be seeing. I would compare this more to maybe Bonnie back in 98 or 9, something like that. Bertha was another one that almost had an identical track to this. And both of those, we ended up with several tornadoes. One did damage, quite a bit of damage. September 4th of 99 maybe, did quite a bit of damage in Hampton to some apartment buildings up there, flipped a ton of cars. That's an unusually strong one. Typically they aren't as strong with the tornadoes out of a hurricane, but that's the one I would compare it to. The other thing I want to talk about is people are saying, so wait a minute, we aren't going to get flooding? And that really depends on where you're talking. Typically with a nor'easter, the wind takes all that ocean water, drives it into the bay. Then it takes that bay water and it drives it into, the Lynnhaven Bay, Lynnhaven, and it drives it down the Elizabeth River, and it drives it into all these spots where we're used to, Ghent, et cetera, where we're used to seeing a lot of flooding. This is a different direction. It is similar in terms of the direction to what Isabel did, but Isabel was even stronger. It lasted a lot longer, and it had been building up. It was a category 4, wasn't it, Evan, at one point?
Yes,
or maybe even a 5. It was a huge, huge storm, built up this giant wall of water so that when it came in, it was able to bring us higher storm surges than we were expecting here. So again, getting back to the flooding. Generally, late tonight, early tomorrow, southerly winds. So if you live along northern shores of Dare, along the Sound, northern Terrell County, along the Sound, you're going to see very low water as this thing starts humming along, and it's going to move on to the north end of the Sound, the Albemarle Sound, and it's going to drive it up into places on Currituck, drive it up to Elizabeth City, drive it up the Perquimans, the Pasquotank, the Chowan Rivers, drive it up the Currituck Sound here and into Back Bay, which will cause problems on Knott's Island. It'll cause problems in areas of Pungo where a strong northerly wind can begin to give us some issues. So that's what happens then as we get into, let me move this ahead a little bit, into tomorrow. And then also does the same thing in the Elizabeth and the Lynnhaven basins. It draws some of the water out. Eventually the storm moves to the north and we get a little bit different direction wind. But what that is going to do is then move it up into the bay, especially the west side of the eastern shore. Mobjack Bay with a southeast wind. You'll get some flooding around Mobjack Bay, a foot, maybe a foot and a half or more above a high tide. So a few issues. Poquoson, not as much of an issue. Here's Poquoson, not as much of an issue because you're facing, again, more west or northwest, so that wind won't be able to drive into you. So that's what we'll watch for in terms of the flooding. Worse to the north, worse in southern-facing sort of beaches and tributaries, if you will. Evan?
Now, Jeff, I've had a few people ask me about trees coming down and how everybody, always references Isabel. Well, this is a lot different than Isabel because Isabel came after we had a bunch of rain, and we have seen some heavy pockets of rain this past week, but we were pretty much even as far as rainfall totals go. I am a little concerned that since we haven't had a big system come through with winds or a winter storm or something, that maybe not all the limbs, we haven't seen some of that being shed over the past few years. So that could be one of our big concerns as far as power outages go, those trees and the power limbs. I know down by my parents' house in Chesapeake, Dominion Power has been doing a very good job of clearing out a lot of those underneath a lot of the power lines and around the power lines. So they've been doing that for the past few years because we haven't seen anything come through lately. I know a lot of folks are concerned about tornadoes, and this is a great reason why we encourage you to have a weather radio, or now most smartphones, because they issue those polygonal warnings, most smartphones will go off for a tornado warning. So make sure you haven't turned that alert feature off on your smartphone because it's based on your GPS. So you have to have location services on, but if you have your location and those alerts, then you will get alerted via your smartphone of a tornado warning as well.
Yeah. Somebody asking about Chesapeake, other people asking about Newport News, asking about the Eastern Shore. So again, we can go over it. We just talked about the flooding. In terms of the rainfall, everybody will get heavy rain, 1 to 3 inches, but not nearly as heavy as some of these areas just to our west and on up to our northwest. So the big problem, and it doesn't matter if you're in Newport News or if you're in Hampton or if you're in Virginia Beach, the winds are pretty much going to be similar for everybody, sustained of 40 to 55 miles per hour with gusts to 70. You think about it, it used to be if we had winds over 55, we would get a severe thunderstorm warning. Now they've changed that to 60. So imagine we've had a number of thunderstorm warnings so far this summer. If you've been sitting in an area that had one of these severe thunderstorm warnings and you're looking at the trees and everything's going nuts and we have that 60-mile-per-hour wind and it knocks your tree down and your neighbor's tree down, think of that everywhere, not just in your neighborhood. That is what's going to happen when we get some of these winds of sustained in the 50s or even 60, and then the gusts in the 60s to possibly even some lower 70s or near 70. That is going to cause, again, the kind of damage we see from a severe summer thunderstorm, but on a widespread basis. And it doesn't matter if you're in Matthews, Newport News, Hampton, Chesapeake, et cetera.
And it's going to not, with a severe thunderstorm, it might be that way for 10, 15 minutes. This is going to last a lot longer. But one of the good things about this storm is it is going to start accelerating northward. So we're looking at several hours, but not 12 hours or 15 hours, like you would get with a slow moving storm system. So that's pretty good. We do have a lot of folks who are in mobile homes, and we do always suggest in these situations, we'll likely be under tornado watch tomorrow, that if you can go to a neighbor's house or a family member's house that is more secure, that is the best thing to do. It's a little more difficult now with some of the, staying at home, some of the social distancing and stuff that's going on. But certainly with mobile homes, anytime we're talking about a tropical system coming through, even if it's a weak hurricane or a strong tropical storm, 70, 75 miles per hour really doesn't make a difference. Mobile homes are really a dangerous place to be.
Lex asked, did it change course? The answer is not from our forecast. It depends on when you're talking about. If you're watching from 2 days ago, the Hurricane Center had it farther to the east. We kept saying they needed to move it west, and it's ending up almost exactly where we had said a couple of days ago, maybe even 3 days ago. The odds of us getting 40-mile-per-hour winds or more, basically nearly 100%. And again, we could even have, that's only at 40. The odds of us getting 50-mile-per-hour winds or 55-mile-per-hour winds are probably, 60 or 70%. So that's why we're going, again, that range, 40% for sure, and maybe as high as 55 or more, 50, 55, 60, potentially for a brief period of time in terms of the sustained winds and then the much higher gusts.
Right, and that sort of follows this exact track. These are both products from the National Hurricane Center, so you can see those purples where Jeff was showing right over parts of Norfolk, right along and just on the east side of the track of the storm. And then again, it's going to race off towards the north, and by 2 a.m. on Wednesday, located up around areas of New Hampshire and moving into Maine. We've mentioned again, coastal areas will see the stronger winds. Inland spots will see the heavier rain. There is the potential, if we get a heavier downpour in some of our urban areas, that we could have some of that urban flooding. We had it with several storms, parts of Virginia Beach, Norfolk, some of those underpasses. If you get a heavy downpour over a short period of time, we could see some of that flooding. I think the bigger issues with that will be back closer to Interstate 95, and the bigger issues with the wind will be closer to the coastline. Again, we're saying 40 to 55, gusts to 70. Would not be surprised to see the wind sensor down on Duck Pier or up at Cape Henry, some of those having some of those gusts over 70 miles per hour. That one is elevated, and the one at the end of the pier,
it's at the top of the lighthouse at Fort Story. And that happened last time with, was it Bonnie or I forget, one of the, Isabel maybe.
Yeah, Isabel.
One of the storms came through, and it ended up producing sustained winds of hurricane force. So we kept saying, you know, we still haven't had a hurricane force sustained wind here, despite all these storms over the years. And somebody pointed out and said, yeah, we have. How about Cape Henry? No, that doesn't count. It's got to be 5 feet above ground, not sitting up the top of a lighthouse. So some of those gusts, absolutely, you go way up there and they're going to be way over 70 miles per hour probably. So pretty much running out of a number of questions. So we've talked about, you know, what's Gloucester going to do, et cetera, et cetera. Well, we have given the timing for everybody and the kind of winds expected for everybody. So we'll wrap it up here with a final look at the timing. Evan, do that.
That's right. The main thing we're watching is after midnight, things will start to deteriorate. First in the southern locations,
right,
and it'll work its way off towards the north. So let's talk again about the power outages. We talked about scattered power outages through much of the area, numerous power outages in other locations. And as far as those winds, we'll take camera 5 again and just kind of time things out, let you know what to expect as we go here. 7 o'clock this evening, we're looking at just, you know, inland spots, you know, or down across coastal North Carolina, just starting to get some of those winds. It's really not until after midnight that we start to see those winds picking up. Again, 5-10 miles per hour, but down across North Carolina, 20 to 30 mile per hour wind gusts at midnight. And again, everything works its way. These cities are listed from north to south for a reason. So you can see that as we go here through 4 a.m., Eastern Shore, because of the influence, you don't have much of any kind of land stopping anything, so you got that up along the Eastern Shore. West Point inland spots, not too much. We start to see those winds coming up around 4 a.m., picking up by 8 a.m. That's when we could see some of those gusts.
Quickly, Evan,
yes,
because this matches with what you're talking about. People are saying, you know, well, what direction? We talked about it a couple of times, but people are coming in and out of the, you know, Facebook Live. So when you talk about these numbers, explain and show quickly how it's generally from the south, for example.
You know, the center of the storm is located right up in here, so those southerly winds coming in, and that's why we've been talking about water being pooled here in the Pamlico Sound coming up on the southern-facing beaches down in Hyde County, southern-facing beaches and rivers in North Carolina along the Albemarle Sound, Currituck Sound. So those southerly winds coming up, affecting first the ocean side of the eastern shore, and then eventually as the storm pulls away, those winds will switch back around towards the west and eventually the southwest. So by 2 o'clock in the afternoon, winds will be diminishing for just about everywhere except the eastern shore.
All right, well, I think that's going to wrap it up for this edition. We got to get ready. We're going to do updates coming up the top of the hour, roughly, on our air, 9 o'clock and 10 o'clock. Then we'll be on with a special hour-long show from 11 to 12. We'll have updates at 1 a.m., 2 a.m., and then starting at 2 a.m., when things are really getting ramped up, you're going to have Tim and Craig on the air. You're going to have Peyton and Rochelle working as well, updating social, maybe putting in a brief appearance on air. And then later in the morning, at some point, I'm going to try to get a couple hours sleep and come back at some point. And then Evan will be in again tomorrow afternoon. So we'll have at least 4, if not 5 of us here at the same time later tonight and on through the day tomorrow. But for now, that's the very latest. We hope you found this informative.
And of course, you can always download our storm mode hurricane guide. Give you a few minutes or 30 seconds here to pick up your cell phone. If you're watching us on your cell phone, switch over to the camera after we're done, and you'll be able to take a scan of that QR code or use a QR code reader, and that will provide a link. Usually it's down at the bottom of your camera on the screen, and then that'll give you a download link for the 13 News Now Storm Mode Hurricane Guide. A lot of great information in there, emergency numbers, who you can call if there's an emergency, if your power goes out, Dominion Power. You can look at the flood maps and see, again, what you need to do to prepare.